Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Hunting 101 by Harold Magnussen. So someone asked earlier, what sort of modules do you need to be a hunter or a tackler? And that is a warp scrambler. These are the bare minimum. I linked to Warp Scrambler 2 in Fleet Chat. If you have the skills for Tech 2, go for it. It has a longer range. But the T1 and Meta 1 still work just fine. Warp Scramblers deactivate target ship's micro-warp drive and micro-jump drive, as well as having 2 points of tackle. This is critical for catching people because they're often micro-warp driving around, or bigger targets like battlecruisers and battleships have micro-jump drives. Like if you find a Dominix or a Praxis when he's out ratting, if you point him, even though he doesn't go very fast, even with a micro-warp drive, he's a battleship, he's pretty slow. But if he spools up his micro-jump drive, he booshes himself 100 kilometers in the direction he's going, you're going to lose tackle, and he just warps off. So scram is absolutely critical. Now, the micro-jump drive has a spool-up time and an animation. If you have effects turned on, you're looking at the ship closely, you can see when they try to do it. However, if the ship gets scrammed, either between the spool-up and the end of the cycle or beforehand, the MJD will cancel, or the jump field generator will cancel. Like you'll see boosh tactics on fleets happening sometimes where a command destroyer will warp in and try to get close to our fleet and then boosh half of us away with up to 25 people, 100 kilometers in the direction they're traveling, which is away from the main fight, which splits up the fleet. And people you're hunting often will try to MJD away if they're battlecruiser or battleship if you don't scram them properly.
Oh, so it takes anybody, regardless of like if you're fleeted or not. Any ship in that perimeter goes with them.
Yeah, it's a random chance too for the command destroyers. Now, scramming somebody means you're going to be much closer range than a long point. So battleships in particular, there's a risk of getting smart bombed. The reason the T2 and interceptors are especially bonused for longer warp disruption or warp scrambler range, it allows you to orbit something outside of the smart bomb range. Even the T1s, if you orbit carefully, you can orbit outside the smart bomb range, which is normally about 5,000 kilometers for the large smart bombs, 5,000 meters. All right, so let's take a talking about D-scan, which is the primary tool for hunting. Everybody please undock from the Fortizar, and then stop your ship. We'll get some practice with D-scan. So let's talk about some of the advanced features of the directional scanner. If you hit Alt plus P as in potato chips to bring up your probe scanner window, you'll also have your solar system map, which will also show, if you have it set to, the sphere of your D-scan radius. You should also see all of the cosmic anomalies in the system. When you're hunting people, for ratters in particular, and also miners sometimes, you're going to be looking primarily for cosmic anomalies. Yes, the green ones that everyone can warp to immediately and are fully scanned already. The ratters will be in combat anomalies, and sometimes the miners are in the ore anomalies. If you pull up your D-scan window, and you have your anomalies sorted by distance in your probe scanner window, so closest first, when you have the D-scan set to max range 14.3 AU and max angle 360 degrees, that's the big sphere, if you get a result that's potentially a ratter, like an Ishtar is a very common ratting ship these days, or a Gila, or a Myrmidon, or a Praxis, or a Dominix. So you get the result on the max scan when you jump into a system, but you don't know exactly where it is. So the trick to narrowing that down is first by reducing the distance. First you drop your D-scan to a 10 AU scan, and if he still shows up, then it means he's clear. Okay, he's less than 10, he's within 10, but less than 14, because that's what it tells you. If you drop the distance again to 5 AU, and he's still on scan, that tells you he's within 5 AU. If you drop the D-scan, for example, to the third tick or lowest tick, which is 1 AU, and he disappears from your D-scan, that means that he's greater than 1 AU, but less than 5 AU, which was the last distance you checked. So whatever point he disappears, he's somewhere between the new distance and the previous distance. Now if you hover your mouse over the little box next to the AU on your D-scanner for the distance, you can scroll your mouse wheel to change by 0.1 AU rapidly and precisely. So you might scroll up to say 3 AU, and he still doesn't show up. So now you know he's somewhere between 3 AU and 5 AU. Now at this point, depending on the number of anomalies in the system and the distances away from you, you may be able to narrow it down to a couple places, or there might still be a whole bunch. Once you've got a rough estimate of the distance he's away from you, within about 1 AU generally, once you can narrow it down to a couple of sites, when you have the D-scanner set to the distance that he shows up at, next thing you do is change the angle to 5 degrees. So let's say he didn't show up at 3.2 AU, but he showed up at 5 AU, and there's only 3 or 4 sites between those two distances in the solar system from your position. At that point, I'd switch to a 5-degree angle, and then if you hold V is in Victor, on your keyboard, and left-click one of the anomalies on your probe scanner window, your camera will rotate and focus, and your D-scanner will refresh on that site direction. That will check within 5-degree radius of your camera pointed at that site. If he shows up, that's the site he's in. 9 times out of 10. If it doesn't, he's not there. And you hold V and click on the next site within the radius, within the distance parameters you've already figured out. Camera rotates, D-scan refreshes. And usually you'll be able to find him that way. Sometimes you'll be in a position in space where there are 2 cosmic anomalies that are really close to each other from your point in space, so a 5-degree D-scan could pick up both of them. But most of the time, if you're positioned decently, kind of in the center roughly, you'll get a nice kind of radial spread of the sites. So in regards to that, if you're trying to search a system full of anomalies, you want to be sitting somewhere centrally located. Like if you look at the probe scanner for this system, you can see there's a whole bunch of anomalies around the star. That's pretty common for most systems. There'll be a big cluster around the central star, and sometimes clusters around other planets. So this gate's a good center scan for this kind of planetary area. You can see how the anomalies are kind of spread out a little bit around us. But if you wanted to get a better scan situation for the central ones, you want to go to maybe the star or one of the close planets, so that your 5-degree scan only picks up one anomaly. Does that make sense?
Can I ask you a quick question?
Absolutely.
So V doesn't seem to be doing anything for me. Are you calling that the hotkey for look at?
V is in Victor or Vimeo or Venezuela.
Hold your
So
mouse over the scan button. It should tell you whatever's hotkeyed unless you changed it.
okay, yeah, so mine is Alt, I think. Scan towards space plus click.
Oh, you have your key rebound then. I'm sorry, maybe I did a custom binding for V, I can't remember. It's been a long time.
No, V is default.
So it's the key that refreshes your D-scan. If you hold it and left click, it'll also scan towards if you've got it on a narrow beam. Does that work with the spacebar for you? You should be clicking on the site from your probe scanner list.
It does, yep.
Okay, so at this point, maybe 30 seconds have passed and you're still holding your gate cloak, which is what you should be doing when you jump into a system. You just focus on D-scan for the first up to a minute until you find something, or if there's nothing, then you move on. Because you've got 60 seconds to do whatever you want while you're holding gate cloak, totally invulnerable. You can be reporting intel to the FC, or you can be focusing on hunting. Like you can say, oh, I've got something on scan, looking for him, and spend the next 20 or 30 seconds narrowing down your D-scan radius and distance. So let's say you get a result. You've got your Ishtar sitting in so-and-so haven. You would then warp to it at 0, ideally. Riding ships are often orbiting their site, so there's really no way to get the appropriate distance without already being there. Like if somebody had a cloak dies on them, you could know beforehand when to warp in from or where to warp in from. But if you're the first one in the system, just go at 0 for the greatest chance of being close to them. Maybe they're orbiting far away, maybe they're orbiting close. But if you're lucky, you'll land within 50 kilometers of them. That what I would consider optimal tackle range for an interceptor, at least. One great trick, if you're fast enough with the keyboard and comfortable, is to drop a bookmark as you're landing, on grid with the site, but still workable distance away. That comes down to timing and experience. So you can drop it within several hundred or maybe 1,000 kilometers of the site. That gives you a quick warp out. You can bounce back. Because when I do this, I used to do this all the time when I was hunting with a stealth bomber. Because you have more time when you're a stealth bomber. Because the positioning matters more when you'd have to get around on top of them. I drop a bookmark as I was landing, warping at 100 cloaked. Warp back to the bookmark, and then warp back again to something closer in the site that the ship was on once I get the overview of the situation. Like if they're close to a wreck or an asteroid belt. But as non-cloaky hunters, you just go at 0 and hope you don't bounce off an asteroid geometry or something when you land. So when you land, the next step will be to go burning for tackle. You should always be overheating your initial dive for any tackle, either hunting solo or in a fleet. The speed boost from a micro warp drive overheat bonus is significant. I think it's 20%. You will need the thermodynamics skill to do overheating. Let me just link that in case you don't already have it. I think it's under engineering. Yep, there it is. Level 1 lets you overheat. Increasing that levels reduces the amount of heat damage taken. So on your HUD, there's a little green arc at the top of the module for your microwarp drive. If you left click on that little arc, it's kind of a narrow window or button area, it'll highlight green. That means the next time you activate the module, it'll be running overheated or hot. With the higher speed bonus, you can hover mouse over your mouse over it to see the significantly increased max velocity. Now running hot modules generates heat. If you look at your capacitor in the center of your screen, there are 3 little sections between the orange capacitor and the white dots of your health. Those are your heat status for low, medium, and high slots. The first heated cycle of a microwarp drive will probably not generate any heat damage, or if it does, very little, but it's going to build up a lot of heat status. The more heat status you have, the more likely you are to take heat damage on the next cycle. So if the first cycle doesn't cause any heat damage, the second cycle probably will, and the third cycle will add a lot. So I recommend only overheating for 1 or 2 cycles tops. Now it's really difficult to click that little arc at that very tiny button area to get the overload cycle on and off. That's a toggle. It's separate from the module activation. The keyboard shortcut is Shift plus left click to toggle overheat on or off. So if you shift left click the module, it'll go back to running cold or toggle on hot for next cycle. You can
Yeah,
also
I
do
didn't know
this
that.
while the module is running. Like if the module was already active, if you click the green arc or shift left click to toggle overheat, they do the same thing. At the end of its current cycle and beginning of the next cycle will be overheated, but it doesn't go through at the middle of the cycle. It'll keep running at the regular cold attributes until the next cycle starts, then it will run hot. You should also always be overheating your tackle modules until you get the initial tackle, because those give you increased range bonuses. If you overheat the microwarp drive, the warp disruptor or the warp scrambler, you get bonus range to it, and that helps you catch someone that maybe you would have missed them by 1 kilometer otherwise. Also for the stasis webifier, also gets a nice bonus to that range. It goes from 10 kilometers to 13 kilometers even on the meta ones. So generally most routing ships are going to be drone boats or sometimes missile boats. It's very rarely that they're going to be turret based, so it's okay for you to burn straight at them. So as soon as you land on the site, whatever distance the routing ship is away from it, just right click approach and burn for them with a hot microwarp drive and hot tackle modules ready to go. Once you've got that initial movement command going for approaching them, you can shift to right click orbit 500 or orbit 10 kilometers or 5 kilometers, whatever your choice is for the situation. But initially, you just want to be making sure that you're approaching them as fast as possible. You can do this by clicking on them as you're landing from warp in your overview, so that they are selected in your selected item window. You can then be spamming approach with your left-click mouse button and hitting your I have my micro warp drive on F1 key. Or you can also use the mouse. You can left-click and hold on their icon brackets in space, and then as soon as you're out of warp, be holding it over the approach and let go of that, and it'll initiate approach instantly as soon as you're out of warp. It'll go from grayed out to highlight, and you let go, and boom, you're approaching them. The next thing you do is you're going to be spamming target. If you have targeting range initially, that's great. If not, as soon as you get into targeting range, you want to be spamming control click or left click on them to target them as soon as possible. And once they're targeted, once you're within range, activate your tackle modules as soon as you can. You'll probably be traveling at several thousand meters per second. So it's okay to activate your tackle modules a little bit before you think they might come into play. Because you're going to be traveling, pretty fast, depending on your ship type. Whereas you might normally not click the module because it isn't quite in range just yet, but because you're approaching so rapidly, if you click it 1 second before you think you need to, there's a good chance it'll activate on the next server tick and you'll be within range to tackle them effectively. Once you acquire the tackle, it's important to stop overheating all of your modules. Make sure you shift left click to toggle off your heat on your micro warp drive and your tackle modules. Also, often you'll be calling out to the main fleet saying, I've got so-and-so tackled, or pointed, point or scram or web as you have, depending on what you have exactly on them. And either throwing W's in fleet chat or saying your name, Harold has Dominic's tackled here in so-and-so system at so-and-so anomaly website. The next thing you're going to focus on is trying to stay alive, and there are a couple tips I have for that. If you're flying a combat interceptor or a fleet interceptor, or any other ship that has any active reps, like the small ancillary armor repair is pretty common, then you have a few cycles of active repairs. So even if the enemy ship starts attacking you with weapons that'll apply to a small ship if they have light drones or rapid light missiles, as long as you're orbiting them, the damage will be reduced and you will be able to sustain a certain amount of damage for a certain amount of time running that repper. I also recommend overheating that if you're taking a lot of damage. These small armor reps land at the end of the cycle, of the module cycle. So start running it before you're taking armor damage, as soon as you're getting red boxed, or even before that. Yeah, wait until you're getting red boxed.
Are you generally coming off your micro warp drive once you've got them pointed in your orbit? Or are you still keeping a high velocity?
So there are two ways to do that. If they have light drones out, my interceptor is fast enough that I can kite those if I leave the micro warp drive on at a wider orbit to some degree, and I can kite pretty well the medium or heavy drones if they have those. However, that makes it harder to hold a scram. But if they're like a cruiser, or if you have backup along the way, sometimes it is better to stay a wider orbit just on point range, because that keeps you going full speed. Basically, you can speed tank their damage if they have heavy drones or if you're fast enough to outrun light drones. Because if the Ratter is awake, he'll be trying to kill you to escape before your friends arrive for secondary tackle and DPS. So the standard noober approach is orbit 500 and commit, but that's not always the best case for a hunter on a small roaming fleet. Sometimes you have to bounce out. Now, if you're the only one there, it might be worth staying. You're committing to the tackle to wait until someone else arrives. If it's a frigate fleet, they should be there pretty quickly. So what can happen is, like if we're on an Atron fleet, and I've got the initial tackle, but I'm being hit by drones pretty repper. I'm running the active armor repper, but I'm chugging through it. He's bleeding into my structure. As soon as I hear somebody else say they've got him pointed or scrammed or webbed, pointed or scrammed, you wouldn't leave for a web. But once he's got a secondary tackle on him, I can then warp out. So have warp out in mind, pay attention to your direction kind of, and then you can leave the grid as long as someone else is secondary. If you were able to drop a tactical as you were landing on the site, that's super useful, because you can still keep eyes on grid and warp right back in as soon as you're able to. Let's talk a little bit about fleet coordination for hunting. So when I jump into a system, I'll first report how many neutrals in local and what I see on D-scan. It's important to be aware of how far behind you the main fleet is, and that they are properly catching up to you as quickly as possible. So if we're in hunting mode, there are no other hostiles that are otherwise engaging the main fleet. They're going to be, the tackler is their priority, they're going to be right behind you as soon as they can. But if you hear them talking about fighting people on a gate, then that means they're aggressed. So you wouldn't want to be tackling anything else, even if you have eyes on a juicy target. So it's important to communicate what you see in system and what you're looking for. If you jump in and there are no targets, you can say nothing on D-scan, nothing in system, going to the next gate. Then you wait for them to jump into that system and warp to the next gate, and then jump through to the next one. Because it's easy to get ahead of the rest of the fleet, especially in an interceptor. You want to wait until the fleet's as close to you as you can before moving on ahead. Because if you get a first tackle on somebody, if they've got light drones or rapid light missiles, they're going to be able to kill you pretty quickly. If the main fleet's not only one jump, but one jump and a whole star system behind, like 30 AU warp or something, that's a significant time delay, even for other frigates. Also, it's good to communicate with your FC for target choice. Tell him what you found and what you're going for. He may say, no, that's a bad target for us, don't bother with it. Like if we see a Nyx ratting and we're in an Atron fleet, that's not a good target for us, even though you could warp in and point them and I'll die. But like if you see a Myrmidon or a Vexer, that's a great target for us. So go for that. Let's talk a little bit about Dotlan. Dotlan is super useful not only for finding your way around a two-dimensional map of the solar system connections, but you can also use it for hunting. I've linked the Pureblind region map in Fleet Chat for you guys. Everyone please pull it up and look at it. Now in the top right area of the website, below the very top right search bar, along the bar with a bunch of other icons below Navigation Alliances, Sovereignty, Faction Warfare, and Donate, you'll see another search bar and two drop-down menu boxes. We're concerned with the middle one, which will be Sovereignty by default. That's the filter for Dotlan. If you click on that, you can change the map info layer to all kinds of super useful information. If you scroll down to the bottom, you'll find some live data results. We're generally interested in NPC kills if we're hunting ratters. If you click on where it says NPC kills, that'll change your map to show you the total number of NPC kills within the last hour or so. This is not quite live data up to date. It doesn't change, but it will update once an hour or so based on the previous hour's data. So you can see there were about 163 NPC kills in QTech 5 in the last, maybe hour and a half, 2 hours time frame.
So lots of people ratting in CTAC H.
Yep, you can see the density based on the color. The light green are pretty low, and the red ones are high for that region. So you see top right corner, there's the higher number, 211 CTAC H. That is an indication of more ratting activity happening over there. This is how you find where you want to go on roaming fleets or hunting fleets. You look for the ratting kills data to find out where people are ratting. You go there and look around. Now you can also look at the NPC kills delta map layer. This will show you the rate of change, not the rate of change, but the actual change in ratting numbers from the last hour over the hour before that. So if it shows in red, that means there were less rat kills in the past hour than the hour before it. But if they're green with a number associated, it means there were more rat kills in the previous hour than the previous hour before that, which can also be an indication of ratting happening in that system. Continued ratting happening in that system, whereas the red ones are dropping off means maybe nobody's ratting anymore, or they're ratting a lot less.
I didn't ever look at all those options on Dotlan. Man, R2, everybody and their dog jumps into R2.
Yep, super useful for showing traffic. You can even, I think, show pilots in space average. Oh, that's the in-game map. You can get jumps, ships pod kills, NPC kills from Dotlan. Alright, let's talk about hunting ships. I like to fly an interceptor because they're super fast and they have a bonus to the warp disruptor and warp scrambler optimal range. So if I heat my micro warp drive, my interceptor with these skills I have, I can get 7,320 meters per second, which allows me to cover great distance or significant distance in the blink of an eye, basically.
What's a good interceptor that you're picking? Like I don't an example of one maybe.
The Ares and the Malediction are the most common because they have the low slots. Because the mid slots are critical for tackle in my warp drive, but the low slots, they have 4 low slots each, I think, which is a good fitting for the small armor repair and some speed mods.
Okay.
And they also have high base velocity. I fly the Ares personally because I like it's very fast. Interceptors can also fit the interdiction nullification module, which helps as if you're flying the scout role in a fleet. Also allows you to go through bubbles, can be useful sometimes, not always necessary. Let's talk about the small Nosferatu. I recommend always having a small energy Nosferatu on any tackle ship you fly, or hunter, if possible, because that will allow you to maintain the small amount of capacitor to run your tackle modules even if you're being capped out. Oftentimes cruisers are up, might have a single medium newt, which isn't scary if you're flying a big ship. When you're flying a small frigate, your capacitor can be rather limited. They can 1 or 2 cycle your capacitor down to 0, and then if your scram turns off because there's no capacitor, they warp away. But having a small Nosferatu can keep just enough capacitor to run your scrambler, even if your micro-warp drive or other weapons are turned off.
So that one actually steals cap from them and gives it to you.
Correct. There is the limitation that they have to have more capacitor than you do, but if you're being neutered out to 0, that's basically guaranteed. If they're a ratting ship, they're always going to have more cap than you. Like just as an example, if you had 99% capacitor and you turned on a Nosferatu against a ship that was itself being capped out, you would not get any energy from them because your capacitor is greater level than theirs. But if they're neuting you out and they're a bigger ship than you, they're going to have more capacitor. You can NOS off them. Okay, that's going to be our destination. Dog 6 HQ. I'm told Brave used to live there. That's before my time personally. There's some neutrals living over there. We'll go say hello. See if we can find somebody to tackle along the way. Hello.
That's a huge pack.
Got like 9 neutrals, 1 red.
A dozen or so Osprey Navy issues. They would eat us for lunch and a saber. Are they on WW gate? I'm using my D-scan. They are not. Take this loop up to WW gate is green on contact, jump through. Did a quick D-scan 5 degree on the gate to see if there were any ships there. There were not. I also have my D-scan to detect bubbles. So if the saber was sitting here with the bubble up, I would have seen it on D-scan, jump through. We're just going to pass by these guys. Now in case they follow us, we're going to go to the next system immediately, provided there's no bunch in local, and there's not. Take this warp BDV. If you missed it, warp BDV at 0. And we're frigates, we can move away pretty quickly. If you have your D-scan window open when you jump a Stargate, it'll refresh as soon as you load the next grid. And nobody here, just one cloaky camper. Take Fleet Warp Ion. Now if there were more than one neutral in the system, I might have warped to the Sun or one of the nearby planets to check all the cosmic anomalies within range of it, if you look at your solar system map. Because you couldn't D-scan most of them from the gate where we were initially. Nothing on D-scan because all the signatures are too far away. So everybody pick a planet near the Sun or the Sun, warp to something over there, and then D-scan, warp at 100, If you want, you can drop a bookmark pretty close to it, or you can just sit wherever you land. Customs officers are normally pretty safe. Warp 2 points or planets.
Wait, you said warps the sun at 100?
You can do that. It's the common thing to do, so there might be a trap there, but usually not. Okay, I've got a venture on D-scan. Let's try and find him. So reduce by distance until he disappears, then go back up to see him again. Once you've got a pretty close distance, then you switch to 5 degree. Now venture's either at a or anomaly, or an asteroid belt, or a moon.
I'm at the asteroid belt 1, and I've got him on 0.1 R still on my D-scan.
Okay, so if you have a tab for warp out or something for the asteroid belts on your overview list, you can check all the asteroid belts within that range of view. I've checked the 2 ore sites within range of the sun. He's not at those, so is that an asteroid belt or a moon? Which will be on a planet. What's your character? What was your name? You were within one AU of him?
Mini-me.
So I'm just going to warp to you, Mini-Me, from the fleet window, because you've got close on him. Thanks for the
I think
W's.
an asteroid belt 1 as well.
He's either at the asteroid belt, what is that? I'm getting an ion FG5, or at the moon. It's too narrow, or too much stuff over there to see.
Yeah, but I've got him on 5 degree scan from that as well. He's probably at the moon. So you can warp to that structure at 100. It won't show up on your overview list, but you'll see the bracket in space. The kind of blue bracket for a hostile structure. And there's the venture. It's a blue one. Mining a hostile moon. What a man.
That's brave.
So as I was landing on the structure, because it was a hostile one, even though I warped at 100, I dropped a bookmark with Control B as I was landing. And I've got a very convenient 1,000 kilometer bookmark on the same grid that I can warp back to. If this was a hostile venture, I'd look for the rock he's on, because you can warp directly to rocks. And I could then tackle him. But he's blue, so we're not.
I need to practice that a lot. I am not that fast at that.
That's what we're here practicing for. You'll get better at it over time as you learn the muscle memory and the keybinds.
I should have overheated all my modules. I did place the bookmark though.
You don't have to always overheat your modules. If you see that you're landing close to something that you don't need to overheat, you don't have to. But if you're landing outside of your targeting range, for example, like 50 kilometers plus, then you do want to overheat because you're going to be burning towards them for more than 1 second. Because like if you land at 0 and they're 20 kilometers off from you, that's an easy micro-warp drive, 1 or 2 seconds you'll be tackling them. No need to overheat. But if you land, 80 kilometers from them, that's definitely an overheat situation because you have to close the distance much faster. That's hitting the 5 or 6 seconds they have enough time to line and warp out, depending on your speed and ship fit. So if people start lemminging through the gate, even though I said it's red, there's a chance you'll spook people on the other side. Because riders are always watching local chat. As soon as they see a neutral for them, they're going to get spooked if they're paying attention. So it's important to group up sometimes if you want to go through all at once. Check your D-scan. 1 neutral Ishtar. He's at 10. Not at 1. Not at 2. I'm using my mouse wheel distances. He's at 3.1. It's at 5 degree. V scanning. Not those 2 sites. Not that one. Okay, so I checked all the sites within the distance radius, but no results at 5 degree, which means he's either in a previous site that's already despawned the warp-in point, or he's not at a site currently.
I think he warped. He was in at like
Yeah, I think he
7, and then
warped.
I went
Yeah.
down and went back up to 7, and he's gone again.
Sometimes if you load a system and the anomalies aren't loading for you on the main screen camera, you can right-click and go to a planet and then view planetary industry, because that'll load the PI interface. You can then just right-click exit planetary industry, and that should refresh the anomalies brackets on your screen. Ishtar on scan, doing the scanning. Is it 10 AU, 5 AU, not at 1, at 2.1, 5 degree site, not port. Is that this haven, OTG?
Still that was just climbing straight up north of us.
OCO
Up
1.69
top.
AU. I'm warping for the Ishtar. He's still in 5 degree scan. He's probably still here. Warp yourselves OTO 258 Gracious Haven at 0. Oh, yeah, he's warping off as they landed. Close. Fun fact, fireworks do not give you aggression, so I can shoot him with fireworks. I can still jump through the gate anytime. Give him a 7-0 local chat, guys. We'll wave hello. Okay, gate is green, jump through, hold your cloak. And check your D-scan again for any riders. Okay, nothing up from here, so I'm going to warp to the sun at 100 to get myself within D-scan range of all the anomalies. You guys do the same thing, or pick a nearby planet from your solar system map. And I can now D-scan all the anomalies, still nothing. Alrighty, that covers my Hunting 101 class. Any questions, comments, or concerns?
All good, thank you very much.